Imagine waking up thousands of years ago. You are 13 years old, but nobody sees you as a child anymore. You are expected to work, to survive, to help your family. And in some societies, you could already be preparing for marriage and having children. Not because ancient humans were a different species, not because their bodies worked differently, but because the entire world around them followed completely different rules. The idea of a teenager, someone between childhood and adulthood, is actually a very modern invention. For most of human history, life moved much faster. Your ancestors lived in a world where survival mattered more than anything else. But why? Why did some ancient humans have children at ages that feel impossible today? Why did societies accept something that modern people find shocking? And what changed that made humans completely rethink childhood? In this video, we will uncover 4 mysteries. First, why ancient humans reached adulthood so early. Second, why childhood looked completely different thousands of years ago. Third, why survival pressures pushed people towards starting families younger. And finally, why humans eventually created the modern idea of the teenager. Because the story of young parents in ancient times is not just about age, it is about how humans changed the way we live.
Today, when we hear that someone had children at 13, most people immediately think that is impossible. Because in the modern world, 13 years old represents something completely different. A teenager, a student, someone still discovering who they are, someone who is usually years away from adult responsibilities. But for thousands of years, humans did not divide life in the same way. There was no universal idea of a teenager, no long period between childhood and adulthood. For many ancient societies, growing up was not a slow journey, it was a transition. A child became someone who could contribute, someone who could work, someone who could carry responsibility. And this creates a strange question. Were ancient humans simply different? The answer is more complicated. Their bodies were similar to ours. Their emotions were similar to ours. Their desire for family and connection was similar to ours. But the world they lived in was completely different. A world without modern medicine, without long education, without the safety systems most people depend on today. To understand why some ancient humans had children so young, we need to understand the 4 forces that shaped their lives. Because age alone does not explain history. The environment around humans does. For most of human history, there was no universal age when someone became an adult. But we can see how societies viewed adulthood through ancient records. In ancient Rome, adulthood was connected less to a teenage stage and more to legal responsibility. Roman legal tradition developed rules about marriage, family, and social roles over centuries. By the Roman period, girls could legally marry at ages that would feel extremely young by modern standards. The minimum marriage age was traditionally recognized as around 12 years old for girls and 14 for boys in Roman law. But this does not mean every Roman child immediately entered adult life. Marriage depended on family, social status, wealth, and circumstances. The important point is that Roman society did not view age the same way we do today. A number that represents middle school in the modern world could represent the beginning of adult responsibility in another society. But that number hides something important. Ancient people were not biologically older than us. A 13-year-old Roman was not physically a different type of human. The difference was the world around them.
Modern society allows young people many years to study, explore, and prepare. Ancient societies often needed people to contribute earlier, and survival played a huge role. Ancient populations had much higher risks from disease, accidents, and childbirth complications. This lowered average life expectancy. But the idea that everyone died at 30 is a misunderstanding. People who survived childhood could sometimes live into their 40s, 50s, or beyond. The problem was not that humans suddenly became old faster. The problem was that societies organized life differently. A person entered responsibility earlier because the world demanded it. Think about that. The same human body living under completely different rules. But legal traditions only explain what societies allowed. They do not explain why people thought about childhood differently. For that, we need to look at the second mystery. Most people imagine childhood as something universal, a stage of life that has always existed in the same way. But the childhood we know today is surprisingly recent. The idea that children should have a long, protected period before adulthood became stronger over the last few centuries. One historian who changed the way people thought about childhood was Philippe Ariès. In his 1960 book, Centuries of Childhood, Ariès argued that medieval Europe did not view childhood in the same way modern societies do. His ideas became controversial among historians, but his work started an important discussion. Did humans always think of children the way we do today? The answer appears to be no. In many medieval societies, children entered adult responsibilities much earlier. They could become apprentices, workers, or helpers inside households while still very young. In medieval England, some children entered apprenticeships around the age of 7 or older, learning skills from older craftsmen. Imagine that, a child leaving home to learn a trade, not because families did not care about children, but because knowledge and survival depended on skills being passed from one generation to the next. The world worked differently. Today, a 7-year-old is usually beginning school. In many historical societies, that same age could mark the beginning of learning a future role. There was no long stage where someone was considered too old to be a child, but too young to be an adult. The teenager had not been created yet. Think about that for a second. The meaning of age is not only written in our bodies, it is also written by society. But social expectations were only part of the story. Another force pushed ancient families toward earlier adulthood, survival itself.
Imagine living thousands of years ago. There are no hospitals, no antibiotics, no modern medicine. A simple infection could become dangerous. A difficult birth could threaten the mother and child. A bad harvest could put an entire family at risk. The ancient world was unpredictable, and this changed how humans thought about generations. A family was not only about personal dreams, it was connected to survival. Communities depended on the next generation. Children represented future workers, future caregivers, future members of the group. This pressure shaped many societies. In ancient Greece, Sparta became one of the clearest examples of how differently ancient people viewed young people. Beginning around the age of 7, Spartan boys entered the agoge. This was a state-controlled training system designed to create disciplined soldiers. They learned endurance, obedience, survival skills. Their childhood was not focused on preparing for exams or choosing a career. It was preparing them for the role their society needed them to play. Think about how different that world was. A 7-year-old today is usually learning basic skills.
A 7-year-old Spartan was beginning a system designed to shape the future of a warrior. But Sparta was not the only society shaped by survival. Across the ancient world, families faced dangers that modern people rarely experience: high child mortality, disease, food shortages, uncertainty. These realities influenced when people formed families and how societies organized life. But here is where the story becomes even more interesting. Humans did not suddenly become kinder or smarter. The biggest change came from something else. Humans changed the world around them, and that created something completely new: the teenager.
The teenager is one of the newest stages of human life. For most of history, people moved from childhood toward adulthood much faster. But this started changing when societies transformed. The Industrial Revolution, beginning in the 18th century, changed how humans worked and lived. Factories grew, education expanded, families changed. Children who once worked alongside adults increasingly spent more time learning before entering the workforce. By the 20th century, many countries introduced stronger child labor restrictions and longer education requirements. In the United States, the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 created federal rules limiting child labor and setting standards for working ages. Changes like these helped create something that previous generations rarely experienced: a longer period between childhood and adulthood, the teenager. Think about how strange this is. The teenager is not a new biological stage. Humans did not suddenly evolve a new age category. Society created space for it. A young person could spend years learning, developing skills, discovering interests, preparing for the future. The world became safer and more complex, so growing up became slower. And this is why ancient life feels so different. The human body did not completely change. Human society did.
When we hear that ancient humans had children at very young ages, our first reaction is usually shock, because we see the past through the eyes of the present. But history asks us to imagine a different world. Ancient humans were not living shorter, stranger versions of our lives. They were solving different problems, facing different dangers, following different rules. The teenager we understand today did not always exist. It was created by thousands of years of human change: longer lives, better medicine, more education, a safer world. And maybe the biggest lesson is this: humans did not only evolve biologically, we evolved socially. We changed the world around us, and that changed what it means to grow up. Thousands of years ago, a 13-year-old could represent the beginning of adult responsibility. Today, a 13-year-old represents the beginning of discovering who you are. The number stayed the same, but the meaning completely changed. What part of ancient life would shock you the most? Share it in the comments, because the story of humanity is not only about where we came from, it is about how much the world around us can change who we become.